Welcome to BioBytes. Today we have Ronan O'Hagan with us. Super excited about getting this one going. I'll dive into a few of the key, highlights that I could pull out. There's a lot more that Ronan will hopefully share with us, but over 2 decades of experience in building biotech teams and businesses, contributed to the development of more than 20 INDs, successfully contributed to 4 approved drugs, currently the CEO and President at Bectas Therapeutics, previously the Chief Scientific Officer at Exilio, as well as at President Health, and 7 years with Merck and almost 10 years with Avio Oncology prior to that. Outstanding background, really keen to dive in a little bit further here, Ronan, and if you could kindly give us a quick intro into your background and some of the critical career moves you made that you felt led to your success, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Really a pleasure to be on talking to you today. Thanks for that introduction. It sounds nice, so I'll try to expand a little bit on it. As you said, I'm the President and CEO of Bectas Therapeutics, which is a precision immunotherapies company. And so our focus really is learning from human patients who are currently not benefiting from existing standard of care therapies, and using those learnings and unique insights we can garner from patients to generate novel therapies that allow us to bring a precision-based approach to the immuno-oncology space, and hopefully through that to raise the cure rate that the IO field has really demonstrated the potential for. And so I think that's really the focus of what we've been doing. As you said, I've been in biotech and pharma for I used to say over 20 years. I think it's now like almost 25. So we're sort of switching to the middle of that. And been fortunate enough to be involved with many talented teams, either as a contributor, team member, team leader, or sort of overseeing and governance roles. And through that, 25 INDs, experience through 25 INDs, 35 clinical programs, and as you said, four now, actually 5 approved drugs. And I found a really interesting statistic that I'll come back to in a second about why I got into biotech in the first place, which is I was reading towards the end of 2023 about the number of patients being treated worldwide with the various drugs that I've worked on that have been approved, and it's over 2 million patients. And I think, when anybody gets into the biotech industry or the pharma industry and looks at making medicines, the real driving rationale for that is, can I bring benefit to patients? And so, that's a number that I'm really proud of. It's sort of, it justifies my decision 25 years ago. And I think that's true for many people. If you're fortunate enough to be involved in the kinds of talented teams that bring drugs through to approval and to patients, it's amazing to look back on how that has had an impact on people's lives. So, when I think about myself and my background, I would describe myself as a scientist by training, and a builder by nature. And by that, I mean, my formal training was as a scientist. All of my career path has been predominantly through the research and development arm of biotech and pharma, into leadership roles and the CEO role more recently. And I think what brought me through that path is really my desire and affinity for building. And by that, I mean building scientific programs. And when you start off early in your career, you're building programs. You're building scientific rationale. You're building projects. And if that goes well, then you start to build teams around those projects. And I think it's really important to learn the lessons about not just building the science, but building the teams. And that expands into sort of building organizations and ultimately building companies. And all of that is kind of an expanding aspect of what the build is like. And that's really sort of the driving motivation for me always, is to figure out, how do I build teams, organizations, businesses that can deliver on the core mission that we all have in the life sciences, which is deliver better medicines and improve health for patients. So that's really sort of been the focus of those things. And so I think that science combined with nature, that it's also maybe nature nurture in a way. It's in sort of the science is the nurture piece to some degree, and the nature is the builder. And so I've married those, I think, over the last 20 or so years. So sort of historically, I'm sitting as the president and CEO at Bectas right now, as I talked about. That's a company that's come out of the work that I helped to lead in translational research at President Health, where I'm the chief scientific officer as well. And that's a really very much a digital health and translational science focused company. So it's a very unique sort of two-legged company that sits both in the health tech, med tech side of the healthcare world, as well as in the life sciences and biotech world. And prior to that, I was chief scientific officer at Exilio. That was a company that I joined just as we were closing the Series A, and helped build that from effectively two postdocs in the founders lab who were extremely talented, great people to seed a company with, because they had not just great scientific talent, but they had an affinity for understanding how to work in a business biotech environment as well. And we built that company up over the first 3 or 4 years that I was there to through an IPO, 4 development candidates in that first 3 years. There's 3 programs currently in the clinic that show some really nice early clinical data. And then I came to Exilio out of Merck, which is obviously a pharma setting. And there I was leading the oncology discovery group, and spent a number of years also leading translational oncology, which is really a large cross-functional team focused on understanding from patients who was and was not responding to Merck's dominant oncology agent, which is Keytruda, and using that information really to inform on business strategic decisions for the company, what sort of interactions, what sort of partnerships, what sort of acquisitions, and what sort of discovery science work should we be doing as a result of what we were learning from patients. So I think that's sort of the background. And if I stop at that and sort of say, well, why did I make those steps? And sort of the origin story for me in biotech was really, I was in research at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, working in an academic lab there, with a plan to pursue sort of a traditional, hey, I'm going to write an R01 grant and I'm going to get my work funded and I'm going to set up an academic lab somewhere else. But one of the things that happened over the almost 4 years that I was at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute is I was working in an older building called the Mayer Building. And there was a new building in which was housed the Jimmy Fund Pediatric Oncology Clinic. And so because it was a new building, that's where all of the seminars were, all of the free lunches were, all of the speakers came there. And so almost every day of the week, I had to go from my lab across past the Jimmy Fund Pediatric Oncology Clinic and the front doors of that clinic, and on to a research seminar or a talk or give a presentation or what have you. And so what ended up happening was I would see every single day pediatric oncology patients, so young kids who were undergoing cancer treatment, and their parents and their families and their siblings. And it sort of struck me, and maybe it took a little bit of time, because like a typical academic scientist, I was very focused on the cool science I was doing, and I really enjoyed that. But it struck me over time that the purpose of all of that work was to build information that would allow us to build medicines that would serve those patients. And so it became sort of a very patient-centric experience over time. And then sitting at the Dana-Farber, as I was, it wasn't just pediatric oncology clinics. You would see adult oncology patients coming in and out as well. I worked with physicians who were oncologists treating patients, and they were working in the labs as research fellows and expressing their frustrations with the slow pace of new discovery. And so that really motivated me to say, how do I better bring what I'm doing to patients and to benefit patients? And so this opportunity came up to sort of not write the R01 grant on the project I was working on, and instead to sort of fold it into a business development plan or a business plan for a new biotech company that a number of the academic leaders at Dana-Farber and throughout Harvard and MIT were thinking about founding. And so that's what I ended up doing, was to say, okay, let's not publish these papers. Let's put this information into the business plan. Let's set up the IP. Let's set up the projects in a biotech company. And so that's sort of what led me to Aveo, which was really founded a lot on work that I was a significant component of at the Farber, amongst other people, of course, as with anything in science. But that really was the driving rationale then. And the line that struck with me at the time was somebody said to me, look, you have an opportunity here to move into the biotech industry and to make medicines that can serve, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. And at some point in time, you'll be able to look back and say, I helped make that medicine. And at the end of the day, that's going to be much more satisfying than any number of Cell Science and Nature papers, right? Which isn't to diss the quality of Cell Science and Nature papers. We all aspire to those. They help you along your career path. But that was really the sort of the starting point. And so that's why I gave you those numbers. As I look at that now, that's sort of realized that goal. And so now I'm thinking about how do I continue to build on that. So that was the first kind of major career transition, was moving from academia to industry and the patient-centric aspect of things. Of course, the first experience then was biotech at Aveo, which was, I was the first scientist. There were 3 of us there on the first day. We had a scientist, an operations person, and a finance person. Everything you need to run a business, right? Except not enough of us. So that was really a phenomenal experience. We had no real senior leadership. We didn't have a CEO. We didn't have a chief scientific officer. We did bring those people in, but it meant that starting from 3 people and building to a company that when I left 10 years later was probably closer to 300, really meant that I saw everything sort of soup to nuts in bringing a company from starting new on day one through a public offering, through a phase 3 registrational study. I wasn't there when that drug eventually got approved, so I didn't quite see that, but I did see the beginnings of the ramp up through a commercialization stage. And so what it meant was wearing many, many, many hats. And the way I sort of describe it is my job as the first scientist there was to try to figure out how to run every new function. How do you run chemistry? Well, you got to go find a chemist. And so let's find some chemists and get them to start working on it. So we did that through outsourcing. How do you do pharmacology? Well, I'll figure out how to do some stuff, get it going. And then always to then go and find an expert who could now come in. We've built a foundation. We've got something moving. We've overcome inertia. Now let's bring an expert who's going to run this and really drive it forward, which I think was a great lesson from an industry standpoint. You don't own anything. It's not yours. It's a team effort. And you have to recognize that there are times when you have to start doing things you don't know how to do, and you can make it work if you learn and listen and talk to people. But then you want to make sure that you bring in experts to sort of really drive that forward. So I think that was a really important piece of that component of my career. And the other bit was because I was there at the beginning, as that CEO came in, as our chief scientific officer came in, as the chief business officer came in, as all of these senior people came in, it meant they would come and talk to me. What's the history of the company? How did it start? What's the science been like? Which was mostly valuable because it meant they knew who I was, and it meant that I could drop by their office anytime over that next 10 years as we got bigger and bigger to say, what do you think about this? Why are you doing this? Why is the company doing this? And really, really learn, by sitting and asking questions of people who were experts and had done this many times before. And I think that's a key lesson, that all of us need to keep in mind at all times is, be curious, ask questions, and try to understand and learn all the time. So I think that was a really key component of what we were doing and what I got out of that sort of initial biotech experience. Subsequently I went to Merck, and really the goal there was to go to a pharma setting and learn what is the absolute top quality way in which to build scientific programs. What are, if there's a list of 100 things that you might have to check off, Merck had all 100 and knew how to do all 100. And in a biotech setting, you may only think about doing 10 of them. And the effective balance is probably somewhere in between. But I wanted to really understand how to do things rigorously from a scientific drug discovery development standpoint. And I really wanted to understand how pharma built programs, thought about programs, and partnered with biotech, because my goal was eventually to go back into the biotech realm. So I spent a lot of time at Merck. I was fortunate to have many, many different roles, from early discovery through early development, business development roles involved in sort of acquisitions, mergers, licensing deals, all of the business development side of things. And I think got real value out of that. Learning. And so those two pieces to me are when people ask me for career advice, often I'll say, I think it's really valuable to start in a super small company because you get exposed to everything quickly. But you also want to marry that with a pharma experience because you get real depth in a particular area and sort of because of the resources that a pharma company has, you can understand how to do everything you could possibly do to move programs forward with the greatest confidence. So I think those are the two pieces from a career move standpoint. I'll pause there for a second and sort of hopefully that answered some of your question, maybe a lot more than you asked. So
no, thank you, Ronan. That's really insightful, and I think going from academia and then stepping into Biotech, which was, as you mentioned, three of you to begin with, and then seeing that exit at, almost 300 people 10 years later. I mean, that's fantastic. I think the part that sticks out to me is you then went to Merck and spent, almost 7 years, if not a little bit more, before then making your next move, where I think that understanding of, how does a big pharma organization, be as successful as it possibly can when it's executing programs, and how does it do the partnerships? I think that clearly led to a lot of your movement as you continue to grow in the industry. And you touched on two really key points there about, marrying those two together and understanding what it's like from both ends of the spectrum when you're trying to become a leadership member within a growing biotech. And I want to dive in a little bit further on that. What two bits of advice throughout this journey that you've had over the years would you provide to somebody who's already a leader or a CEO or a C-suite member in a biotech, or equally somebody that's aspiring to step up into that space? I mean, what two bits of advice would you share, Ronan?
Yeah, and to some degree, I think, it depends a little bit on where people are in their journey. The advice is the same, but to some degree, people will have learned some of these things along the way. So, the first piece of advice is something that, I got from a book many years ago, a book written by a guy by the name of John Maxwell. It's called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. If people haven't read it, it's a great read. And the first law is something that's really struck with me for a long time, which is what John Maxwell describes as the law of the lid, which is effectively that your ability to accomplish anything important is limited by your ability to lead and influence other people. And I think from an early career, when you think about people in their early career, there's an important and appropriate focus on technical capabilities. So as a scientist, I had to learn how to do scientific experiments. I had to learn how to set up scientific projects, make good decisions based on data, and so forth. And the way someone else, a guy by the name of Matt Mirasola, who is really talented, career development and sort of human resource and leadership counselor, I suppose, to some degree, many years ago, provided me with a great analogy that I've used frequently. And when I use this, if anybody who I know listens to this podcast later, they're going to laugh because they'll have heard this many times. But is this analogy of how a bicycle works. And if you think about the bicycle, the back wheel of a bicycle is what drives the bicycle forward, right? And that is really all of the technical ability that we have and the sort of the capabilities we have that are specific to a functional area and to what we do early on. And that's really important, and you have to develop that. The challenge, of course, becomes that if you want to continue to make the bike go where you want it to go, you have to build a front wheel too. And I think the front wheel is really effectively the skills that are related to leadership. The soft skills people like to describe, but I really think they're leadership skills. And those are your ability to sort of not only to make good decisions for yourself, but also to lead other people. And if you build those skills, that's going to help you to be an effective leader. And you can build those over time. And I think we have generally sort of ecosystems in biotech where there's a lot of emphasis, because it's a very technical industry, on building that back wheel. And so whenever there's an opportunity to build those front wheel leadership skills, I think people should take those seriously and really pursue them. And I think a lot of times you need to do that yourself. And that means reading books, listening to podcasts like BioBites. I think that there are important opportunities to learn from other people in those ways. And so I think that's a really important, for me, a piece of advice I would give everybody. I think then when you're sort of sitting, a little bit later on in time, when you're sitting in a leadership setting, and there are a lot more talented and experienced leaders out there than me, but I would say that one of the key things that I've learned over the last years is it's really important to define and know what your core values are. And I mean personal values, I mean your company values. Hopefully those are aligned, because that's really where you get the best performances, when one's personal values are aligned with the values that you bring to a company. And I think that's really important because biotech is not easy, right? It's a little bit challenging. You can just look at the statistics. If you start with a new program, what's the probability you're going to get to a successful medicine? It's pretty low. There's a lot of challenges along the way. It's incredibly complex. There's multiple stakeholders who have different motivations and desires. whether it's, the people working in the company, whether it's the board of directors, whether it's the partner that you're trying to do a deal with. Everyone has different value or different motivations rather than values. And I think, so what that means is you have to make a lot of hard decisions along the way. And for me, it's always been critically important to understand what are the values at the core of those decisions. So the decisions are founded in the values. And I think if you're missing those, then you make decisions that are perhaps transactional, or opportunistic or in the moment. And it's not that you can't make those kinds of decisions, and you shouldn't. You should at sometimes. But I think if they're founded in values, what you think is really important, it helps guide the decision, right? So I think that's something that's really important. I'll come back and talk about that in a second. Well, actually, maybe I'll just touch on that now. So for me, as an example, the key, sort of the three core values that I really hold to be central to everything I'm trying to do, I describe as three Ps: the patients, the people, and proof of concept. And by patients, I mean, what is the goal? Who are we trying to serve? What's the mission? The mission is to bring better therapies to patients to improve the lives and the health of patients, or in my case, in people living with cancer, because I'm focused on oncology. And so I think if you start with the patients, what do they need? Then you do all the work in order to bring something back to patients. That helps drive decisions. When you have to make a decision about whether you're going to do A or B, which one is going to serve the ultimate mission of bringing the best medicines to patients becomes a really critical foundation. The second thing is the people, and by that I mean the people in the company. Who's your team? Who are you working with? They're individual people. They have value. They're important. They have aspirations, both from a career standpoint, from a mission standpoint. And I think it's really important then to marry the mission of the company with the mission of the people or the individual goals. And again, if you align the goals of the company with the goals of the individual, that sort of deep alignment really brings together teams. And to steal other phrases from people like Jim Collins and others, you got to get the right people on the bus in the first place. And then if you do, and you have that alignment, you can really push hard. Your team's going to push hard. There's deep alignment. You can ask people to do a lot because it's serving them as well as serving the company. So that's what I mean by people. I think you want to try to align that to the degree possible. And that also helps you make decisions about whether those are the right people to stay there. And you can have really productive discussions with people that say, maybe this isn't the right place for you. Let me help you find the right place for you because this isn't going to work out for us. And that's not, you're not kicking someone out. You're actually helping them. And I think that's an important value for me. And the last is proof of concept, which is really to say, it's like a staged or staggered investment, right? You're going to invest a little bit at the beginning to see if something makes sense. Can you prove your idea is right, or can you prove it's wrong? And if it's wrong, you stop. And if it's right, you keep going. And that proof of concept, I think, is really important from an iterative standpoint. And it allows you to invest appropriately, diversify appropriately. And what that ends up meaning is you're able to ask, or you're motivated to ask really hard questions. Don't ask a question that isn't going to give you a no. Ask a question that's going to give you a yes or no answer wherever possible, and be open and willing to accept the no, right? And that informs how you think about portfolio and strategy, but really that proof of concept I think is important. So for me, those are core values, and I try to define and sort of embed all of the decisions that I make around the business, around the scientific programs, around culture, in valuing patients, people, and that proof of concept approach to executing on the science.
And with the last P, David Meeks talks about this as well, which I thought was fantastic. I think as any leader, the main goal there is to understand how to deploy the capital and where that investment is going, and being able to make those hard decisions, which is exactly what you reiterated as well. So that's great. And I guess in terms of your experience through the biotech world, big pharma, how do you foster a culture of innovation and collaboration within the organization across those different size of companies, right? That in itself must be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, innovation is hard, right? biotech is hard because of it's a complex, long process where we're dealing with systems we don't fully understand. Like, how do people actually work? There's a lot we don't know. And innovation is hard, even if you're doing it in a setting where, there's more concrete laws about how things work. And I don't know those fields, but, so I think there are aspects there that are important. Innovation is about collaboration, but it's about individuals being accountable for what they're responsible for. It's about the freedom to fail, but maintaining high standards, right? You can't fail because you just were lazy and didn't bother to think it through. But if you think it through and you ask the hard question and you do it right and you fail, that should be supported. So I think there's these contrasts. Innovative cultures are really flat in terms of their discussion, but they have to have strong leadership and direction. So I think and those contrasts are really challenging things to foster. In my experience, I think they're a little easier to foster if you're starting building something from scratch, because one person, in my case, if I was starting something, I have these particular values and I believe in ways in which we should innovate, building on proof of concept, recognizing the importance of the people, and with an ultimate goal of serving patients. And so I can communicate that and find the first few people who are fully aligned with me. And so you can begin to sort of build off a nucleus like that. I think it's a little more challenging if you come into an organization where you feel like you need to make some changes. If there's a change in direction for the organization to better align with an innovative culture. But again, I think that can be done. In all cases, though, I think the key is to say, here are the values that we're pursuing. This is what we believe are the most important values. And then you need to communicate those values. And most people are good at saying what the values are, communicating them, talking about them. The biggest challenge becomes, and then rewarding them, and not rewarding other things, right? You don't want that misalignment of recognition for, and the classic example that people will cite is, in many industries is this notion that we want greater collaboration, but we reward people for individual performance, which sets up a competitive aspect to rewards and recognition. I think that's a well-defined example of how do you, of not aligning the rewards and recognition with the values. So to me, that's really part of it. The culture is built on defining what it should be, and then rewarding and recognizing people who live aspects and the values of that culture, and being very aware of not accidentally rewarding things that are misaligned with that culture.
And could you share some major setbacks or war scars that you've had throughout your career within leadership in the biotech space?
Yeah, I was trying to think about this question, and I have pages and pages, as anyone in biotech does. There's many setbacks. I sort of thought about a couple that may be relevant, because not the setback in and of itself, but the lesson learned, at least the lessons I learned from the setback. There's one specific program, for example, that I was working on where, we ran a GLP tox study. We didn't get the right doses for the GLP tox study, and the results of that GLP tox study would have told us that we had to start at an extremely low dose in human patients, and we knew that probably wasn't actually an accurate reflection of the program and of the molecule that we're looking at. So, what are your choices? Well, you can go forward and start at a low dose, but that's a really expensive way to think about things, and you're bringing a low and ineffective dose into patients. So if you want to think about that value of patients being valuable, why would you put patients on a dose that you know is not going to be effective for them? There's no chance, right? At least that was our estimation. And so that patient-driven value said, look, we're not going to do that. And that meant we had to go back and run the GLP tox study again. So now you have all these people who were involved in the company, the people who ran the study, some of whom aren't very experienced and have, oh my God, a GLP tox study didn't work. That's a disaster for the company. It's not. It means you have to rethink it. And you have other stakeholders like board members and management and so forth. And so in those situations, it was about transparent communication to everybody. Here's what happened. Here's what we did. Here's what we're going to do next. This is the impact. It does or doesn't have an impact on our timeline. It does or doesn't have an impact on our budget, and so forth, and being really clear about that. And of course, the lessons learned. How are we going to avoid ever doing this again in the future? Because it wasn't something we want to do. I think the other piece on that is in that particular situation, sitting as the leader of the team, not specifically, but overseeing the team that made that call, which turned out to be an error. Ultimately the responsibility sits with me, right? And that was the other thing that was important for me to communicate to people. Look, I'm in charge. I'm responsible. I'll take the blame for this. I'll be the person who'll go front up to the board and say, hey, look, I made an error here, right? We'll fix it. This is how we're going to fix it. And I think those are important cultural pieces because it builds the sense that we're all in this together. You're not sitting there as a leader and, hey, these guys screwed up. They should have done better. I think it's really important as a leader to be responsible when things go wrong. And when things go right, the team did it. That seems easy to do, but I think it's challenging at times. And so I think that was really important. The other lesson I will say that was in that was, to some degree, the fact that it was my fault was true very clearly because I was the one who had the experience there. We were building a new team. They didn't have a lot of experience in drug discovery, drug development. Some people did, some people didn't. And at the time that the decision was being made about the doses, I didn't think it was right. But I wanted to empower the team to make the decision. So that to me brings up one of those challenging cultural aspects, which is what is the balance between empowering your team and driving decisions based on experience, especially when things are wrong. And that sort of becomes a short-term versus long-term decision. Maybe it was actually beneficial to allow the team to make a decision, even though it turned out to be wrong, because it empowered them and they felt empowered for all of the other programs that were run subsequently that those people were involved in. And it also allowed me to take responsibility for something that didn't go well, which I hope built some credibility for me with the team that I had their back in any instance. So that I think that, again, it's step back. How do you communicate it? How do you handle it? And how does that align with the values you have, right? For me, again, around the patients and people in particular in that instance. I'd say another one, which I think was a really good lesson for me early in my biotech career, was I was working on a specific program within my team. We were really excited about it. The molecules looked really good. It had really cool data. There was a great opportunity to address an unmet need in oncology in a novel space with a novel therapy. I mean, it ticked all the boxes that I could think of for a really exciting scientific project and program and drug discovery program. And there was another program that the company was working on that I didn't think ticked a lot of those boxes. It was, in my opinion, it wasn't as exciting. It wasn't going to serve as many patients. It was an earlier stage. But the company made a decision to prioritize the other program over the one that my team was working on, which, as you can imagine, was very frustrating for me leading that team to go, well, why are we doing this? And I sort of went home for maybe a day or two, frustrated with these crazy decisions that leadership were making. And then it dawned on me, well, they've been doing this for a while. There must be something I'm missing, right? And so I had to sort of take that notion that, well, maybe I don't understand something here. And so I went and I sat down with the CSO at the time and said, look, why are we making this decision? It doesn't make sense to me. Here's how I think about the two projects scientifically. And his answer was really insightful for me, really valuable learning. He said, yeah, I agree with you. Scientifically, that's absolutely right. But what you don't know is we have a large pharma partner who wants this other program. They just want to see this next piece of data, and then it's basically a done deal. And so what that reminded me of is in biotech, we're not just running scientific projects. We're building a business. And all of the projects depend upon the ability to build a successful business. And so you need to make good business decisions. They need to be founded in the scientific data, but they need to be good business decisions. So for me, I felt like that was a setback and being deprioritized. It was like, what's my opportunity? But it was an incredibly valuable lesson because I went and asked the question to say, what am I missing? What am I missing? What do I not understand? How do I learn something out of this? So I think those are key things for me. Lessons from setbacks are obviously, we learn more from failure than we do from success. That I think that can be true for sure.
And again, in your experience, what are some key strategies when you're building and maintaining strong relationships with key stakeholders such as investors, regulatory bodies, and healthcare providers?
I mean, clearly communication, right? And it's sort of a trite statement. Hey, communication, and communication isn't easy. To some degree, it's easier in the world of, using Zoom and Teams, and I don't want to leave out anybody, WebEx and various forms of video calling and video conferencing. Um, you know, because it's easier to get a face-to-face conversation with somebody. But to me, it really is about the communication. If you're, you want to make sure that your board is clear on where you're going and what you're doing. You want to communicate early when things go wrong or when things go right. I mean, not so early that you don't know what's happening, right? Sometimes you think something, any scientist will do this. You get an experiment and there's a weird band on the gel and you're like, well, what does that mean? And it turns out, oh, there was a piece of dust on the X-ray film, for those of us old enough to remember when we did things with X-ray film. So I think that you want to understand what it is, but then you want to be transparent early. And communicate early with stakeholders. And again, that sort of goes back to that example about the GLP tox study I was talking about. We talked to the team about what the issues were. We talked to other people in the company so they understood when they heard, oh my goodness, this study didn't go well. That's okay. Here's how we're handling it. We communicated that to the board of directors and made sure that happened. But back before that was a culture of consistent, transparent communication to stakeholders, right? So consistently building trust by having conversations, sitting down with board members repeatedly and consistently and recurrently talking to them about what's going on. With a regulatory agency, you clearly don't have as many discussions, but there are valuable aspects from a regulatory standpoint. We think about, in the stage where Bectas is, where we're moving towards an IND right now. We've got 2 development candidates for 2 programs. Went really fast, super excited, but now we're engaging in IND enabling studies. And so part of the plan there is to engage the FDA in a pre-IND meeting to ask some clear questions about aspects of what we're doing that are maybe not exactly straight off the cookie cutter. Right. And so we want to make sure that we have that engagement early on. We have alignment. And if we do it early enough, if there are areas of misalignment, we can fix those. So we can address ultimately what one key stakeholder, which is the FDA and regulatory bodies in that regard, that's a key stakeholder. And if you don't meet the criteria that stakeholder has, you're not going to bring that medicine to patients. So that's an important piece. So I think that early and consistent communication, and then especially doubling down on that if anything is not going well.
Great. Ronan, what advice would you give to emerging biotech leaders who are looking to navigate the challenges of scaling their companies and continuing to attract investment to grow?
Yeah, I think you go back, to me, everything is founded in what those values are. And communicating those. And again, if you think about what the values that I've talked about are around patients, that's everything about how do you recruit people? Because in the life sciences industry, almost everyone I know, maybe everyone I know in the industry, is motivated by bringing medicines to patients. That's why we all do it, right? Different aspects of how we contribute to the ecosystem, but it's what we're all about. So I think that's important from building your company, recruiting the right talent. It's also important from the standpoint of investment, because you're saying, who are the patients we want to serve? Well, that's defining your market, your opportunity, your business rationale is now defined that way. And so that's the core of what you're going to communicate to investors, I think, as well. So again, that's why I think those are really important aspects. I think maybe something else, which I didn't touch on earlier, but I think is also relevant, is in a fast-moving, innovative, creative industry, if you're going to build a business successfully, you can't guess at what you should do, and you can't wait until you're 100% certain, right? And so, there's a sort of a description of this principle, 40-70 principle, that I think Colin Powell wrote about years ago, which says you need somewhere between 40 to 70% of the information in order to make decisions. If you have less than 40%, you're guessing. And so who knows what's going to happen. But if you wait until you've got more than 70%, you're too late. And in biotech, it means someone else has already moved forward and you're stuck there. And this concept that if you don't make a decision, that's making a decision, that's the over 70%. And so what you really want to do is you want to get enough information to make a good decision. And then you want to rely on your experience and the experience of other people around you, your team, to inform on, when you've got 40 to 70% of the information, what does that look like for people and what's the right decision? If you come back now and say, each time I'm making these proof of concept decisions, right? So I'm making a staged or a staggered investment. I'm going to do a little bit now and a little bit more, and I'm going to invest more and put more resources in, and I'm not going to keep going until I prove this first thing. If you're getting 40 to 70% confidence before making the decision to move to the next step will act as a quality control for a bad decision in the first step. And so what I think that putting those two concepts together allows you to make good decisions quickly and move forward, which gives you more data to allow you to make the next decision. And each subsequent step acts as a backup plan for the previous step in case you made a mistake, and allows you to pivot as necessary. So I think those would be, the two things. Everything founded in the mission of serving patients, that addresses, what you should do, what your program should be, how you recruit people, what you're telling investors. It's all founded there. And then the other piece is you have to make decisions quickly. And if you put that together, take that sort of 40 to 70% information principle and put that together with proof of concept based decisions or staggered stage decision making, I think then you're able to move quickly, but confidently as well. And the data will out bad decisions along the way.
Ronan, thank you so much for joining us here on BioByte. Some absolute gems there, I think, for everybody who's been listening. Incredibly insightful. Thank you for coming on, and we really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Shaq. Really great talking to you today. Thanks.
Thank you.